people here would like to get to know a little bit more about you.
Yes.
They need to know not just about Mqanduli, but some of the ways in which you've grown to become the person who has disquiet inside of you about the country. Share a little bit about you.
No, thank you. So I'll mention just a couple of things which I think are important and kind of also on opposite ends of my life. I mean, there is my continuing experience where I come from, in my village, where I used to play football. Doesn't exist anymore because there's no special planning being done. So they've built house, they've allocated residential plots there. So there's no sporting facility of any kind anymore in the last couple of years. A lot of the young people, including some of my relatives, are in prison. Those who are under 30. And that's because due to socio-economic circumstances and a breakdown just in community life and so on. So there is that. But over the course of my life, I've also seen some things that have really worked well. I got my first job at Volkswagen in 1998, during my third year. And when they hired me, the factory could have been shut down by the German parent, or it could have been revived if the unions, the government, and management could reach an agreement on a new strategy. And that was in the days of the Motor Industry Development Plan. That's how I got a job.
Okay.
And I stayed there for 8 years. And I could see this relationship working. And I could see what was happening in the town of Ypnake and in Port Elizabeth then. So I'm using old language because I'm talking 1999 and early 2000s, right? But then I also went to work for a mining company. And I saw how the opposite can also be true,
right,
in the same country where the mining charter is there, but it doesn't work. It's impractical in many ways, and the regulation is bad, right? And the legal framework in many instances just doesn't work, didn't encourage investment, and we can talk about that. And then, of course, I became a journalist. It was when I became a journalist that I realized you can't just write about things. You really can't just write about things. At some point, you get fed up with writing. Some of us have to do. And I met so many amazing people, and I'm sure everyone in this room is, who knew exactly what needs to be done. They just didn't think they're the ones to do it. And I think that problem persists to this day. So some of those experiences have informed who I am. I'm a parent. My wife and I have got 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And one of the things that happens, especially now that I spend a lot of time in many different communities, is I always find myself looking at children. I always see my children's faces in the children of other people. And when that happens, and I think it's a natural parent thing, you can't bear some of the circumstances people find themselves in.
Sure. So you got 2 boys and a girl.
Yes.
I got 2 girls and a boy. Maybe we can swap.
Yeah. We
can organize.
We can strike a deal.
Right. Okay. Looking into your manifesto, there are some key factors that I believe we need to be able to talk to, even though people can Google, as you've indicated.
Yeah.
Virtually all people get to respond to that which you value the most as the leadership.
Yes.
So you've identified key things that are about what you value as the leadership. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so let me talk about the concept of well-being.
Yeah.
Because it's not only what people told us, by the way. This term kept coming up not just last year before, when we were doing lots of work in different communities in South Africa. That the thing that people are concerned about the most is well-being, whether it is food, it is being healthy, it is being safe, and so on. Our vision that we came up with eventually, which is a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa in one generation, came entirely from those conversations. So people want to be safe, they want to prosper, and so on. That is the first thing. The second thing is family and community. And this is well referred to the past and even the present. Colonialism and apartheid were about partly the destruction of the black family and community structure. It's just true, and it continues to this day. So I'm from the Eastern Cape. There are lots of people who work here. In order to make a living, we really have to disconnect ourselves from our families and our communities to go and work really far from home. Now, I'm not talking about just urbanization, but when I grew up, my grandfather and a few of the older men were surrogate fathers to 70% of the families because the men were working in the mines. That pattern continues to this day because development at a regional level has collapsed, actually. And so people live even further from where they belong. So family is important. The other reason a community is important is that you cannot provide just for each family. You need community and regional infrastructure, which underpins whatever you can do or you want to do to make sure that families and individuals are okay. Right. Whether that is infrastructure, it is how you govern locally, it's allocation of budget and that sort of thing. Yeah. These things are important, and we've tried to build a political idea around this concept. It is the most important. Yeah. And therefore, in order to do it, given that we're trying to think a little differently about how you do need new leaders.
Sure.
Because when you talk to people who think about things the same old way, and even when they come from the progressive movement, I made an example about big deliberately. Because some of those folks are people like me who otherwise are doing well. We really mean well about what we want to do for people. But the conditions in which people live still erode that assistance that people can get.
Right.
But fundamentally, family and community are important.
Brilliant. Now, included in your referencing is freedom and equality. And at the same time, we get to be able to appreciate that equality may not translate into the same thing for somebody in Sandton, cross over the freeway, and go to Alex. When you talk to equality, how do you relate that?
So let me start with freedom. And freedom is, what we achieved was political freedom in a sense in 1994. We didn't take the idea further. But what makes a person really free? It is the ability or the opportunity to live a meaningful life.
Right.
To enjoy leisure, right? To go and watch drama and participate in music, in arts activities, in community activities, and so on. A lot of people simply don't have that opportunity. That young man who was telling me that they stay into nothing every day, even if you gave them, $5,000 a month, there are still things that constrain the attainment of a good quality of life, which gives meaning to freedom. The second and last thing I want to make, because I see there are a lot of men here. Women are not free in South Africa. Eh? We beat and we kill them. And so that's not a political party problem. It's a general social problem. And yet we must aspire to everyone feeling and being free. And that's linked to safety.
Right. If
you're not safe, you're not free, and so on. Equality really is, at its core, equitable access to opportunity. Right. I think as a general rule, we must be comfortable with the idea of those with more getting less from the rest of us, and those with less getting more from the rest of us, by way of what the government is doing. I'm black, I have an income. I don't think that my kids should be catered for the same as far as university entrance financially as the kids of parents who've got nothing. And we test this idea when we talk to people in communities. This idea of paying in what you can afford. People have no problem with that.
Right.
But they don't want their kids to be left behind.
So you've highlighted in your presentation that there is a large number of people who did not vote in the previous dispensations, in the previous occasions when they could make that cross. And you've spoken about having change in a generation. There are at least 5 generations living right now. Which are the ones you wanting to appeal to the most so that they come out of apathy and actually put their name behind Rise?
So the majority of people that are not voting, I hope I am not misunderstanding the statistics, tend to be 25 and above, 25 to 45. That's a rump of the people that are not voting in South Africa. About 13 million of them are not registered at all.
So that's Generation Z and Millennial.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the rest are registered, but they just don't vote because they are angry. Now, out of the unregistered, about 7 million don't have IDs. I mean, I used to be stunned at how many people don't have IDs when we get to, there are so many. Even yesterday, there were people with no IDs. In Kimberley, I was in Bloem the day before, in Mangaung, people with no IDs. And that's another conversation about the services they don't access because they don't have IDs.
So you have spoken about taking local government and capacitating it from a national space or national government capacity.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So every person, every business is in a municipality somewhere. That's just fact. The majority of our municipalities don't work, almost at all. So let me talk about, let me leave Tshwane for now because you know it better, because it's always in the news. Let me talk about KSD or Tambo District Municipality and KSD, which is where I come from. So the municipal budget begins on the 1st of July, I think, runs until the 30th of June. So by October, November this year, the OR Tambo municipality will only afford to pay salaries in the May. That's it.
So the balance of the time?
People sit, they've got lots of time to do lots of things, right? And that can't work. The revenue collection either at KSD or OR Tambo isn't working as it should. Because of economic depression in the area, even the prospects of that revenue are declining all the time. And yet, if you look at Mthatha, it sits in a perfect commercial intersection between the N2 and the R61, with an airport, with a wild coast not far from there, and yet it's the poorest area with fertile land and high rainfall, right? So if we can't fix how municipalities, especially rural municipalities, work, there is nothing Ibrahim Patel can do, or someone who's better than Ibrahim Patel, because there's lots, can do to solve that problem. So it's what I meant when I said we don't want to deal with the basics. So we've prioritized a local government in our manifesto for that reason.
So 100 days after the 29th of May, you are in Parliament. What are the things you're putting in place that gets South Africa feeling they've made the right choice in choosing you?
So, and I'm glad you said we're in Parliament rather than just the union buildings, because we also don't believe that in order to make a difference, you must always be in the union buildings, because parliamentary oversight, and firstly, and secondly, influence in committee and on bills that come through Parliament and working with other political parties and so on is really, really important. And that's, we're going to use our manifesto and our priorities as a linchpin of the parliamentary program that we designed. The most important thing that we want to talk about is food. Linked to food is also climate change. It truly, truly is destroying the ability of people to be able to eat. You might underestimate it, but it is really important. It's also affecting people's safety, infrastructure, people's housing, etc., etc. So that's important. The third one is the quality of people that are in government departments and elsewhere, because that governance and leadership thing is really, really important. And finally, and I mean there are many things, finally, we want to be the place where ordinary people go to understand what's happening politically, whether they belong to Rise Mzansi or not. What does what they're talking about or doing in Parliament mean for me? We're going to be the go-to place for that.
Great. We're about to go and get some perspectives from elsewhere. This is a business school.
Yes.
So in business school, we talk a lot about strategy.
Yes.
And we'd like to be able to get a sense from you as to, we already have the National Development Plan 2030.
Yeah.
You coming in as Rise, what strategic shift do you believe the country needs to go through?
I think the most important thing we now need to do, and not under duress and try and call things something else, is just how we think, not just about political institutions, but about and governance, but also about the economy. So the ANC has been forced eventually to privatize, in inverted commas. I think the strategic question is not whether we're going to privatize or not. The strategic question is, where do we get the capital? Where do we deploy it? And how do we manage the deployment of that capital efficiently? Right. The government does not have that capital anymore. Trying to access it is really expensive, which leads us to private capital, right? Your pension funds and so on, right? In the main. The question is, what rules do we create around the investment of that capital?
Okay.
And what do we change in the current rules in order to do that? Okay. And I think this is where we now need to think differently about what privatization, or private investment, let me put it like that. And I've always said, and I see they're doing it now, the government owns nearly all the roads, if not all of them. It doesn't own a single truck. But when it comes to rail, we wanted to own the rail and to own the trains and the locomotives and so on, but we don't have money anymore to maintain the thing or to buy them and that sort of thing. So do we want to remain married to the ideological idea that with road it's okay for private operators to operate, but in rail it's not okay? We don't have the capital, but we'll choke ourselves to death because we don't want to invite private capital into the space. Right? Energy is another example. The government here sets the price of electricity. It doesn't matter who it is, right? Sets the price of electricity. But there is such a big fight about private generation. So who are we protecting? Consumers? We can protect consumers through NERSA, which is a government institution, if it's staffed and run by competent people who are committed to their constitutional mandate. We don't need to worry about it. We can set out the rules of investment in terms of that private generation. So I believe changing in thinking is the most important. And this is not rocket science, by the way.